The question of affordability, of course, goes right down to the very basics of the economy in Scotland, and the best evidence for that is to look at the GERS, the GERS reports, which tell you what the balance sheet for Scotland has been like over the last 33 years. And there is not one of these years in which the tax take per head in Scotland has been less than the tax take per head in England. We have been paying more than the English taxpayer for 33 years, which tells you a bit about what we're likely to continue doing after independence. And that is the fundamental stability and prosperity that we can look forward to. Added to that, I think we can be confident that we would not spend the billions that the British state spends on foreign wars, on Trident, and on defence in general. The projected defence expenditure would be more than $1 billion less than what our share of it is at the moment. These are the things then that will pay for our health service to remain the way it is. As for the timing of privatisation, that's very difficult to predict. It's just a trend that's almost certain to continue as it is in England after September, if we vote no.
Okay.
I think a more fundamental question is, can the affordability of some of the services we are at present receiving, can it continue if we remain within the United Kingdom? For example, free prescriptions and a publicly owned, freely available National Health Service. And I am surprised that the No campaign are in a state of denial about this, because as Dr. Willett has previously said, there is undoubtedly a continuing privatisation of the National Health Service taking place south of the border, and the raison d'etre for that privatisation is to supposedly save public money. That's why they are privatising. And so if so-called savings are made, or another word for it is cuts in public expenditure, and if, for example, the National Health Service budget south of the border was to be cut by 10 billion pounds, then there would be a consequential for Scotland. That would mean a cut in Scotland's budget of, say, about £1 billion. And if John Swinney, or whoever happens to be the finance minister in Scotland, wants to continue investing in our National Health Service to maintain it as a free service available to all at the time of need, then he's going to have to look around elsewhere to look for savings in education, perhaps, or police, or fire brigade services, or other important, maybe care for the elderly. Something will have to go, because under the existing system, John Swinney does not have the full range of economic levers in order to distribute wealth, in order to raise the tax to maintain our public services. And the only way in which he will ever get that full range of fiscal levers is through an independent Parliament, an independent Scotland.
Hi there, I was just wanting to ask, how is the cost of living be after independence? Is it going to rise? Because young people today are already struggling to get houses and afford living and working full time. And I was just wondering, is everything going to rise?
So prices are going to go up and things are going to be affordable. Annabelle?
Thank you. What I would say is that Scotland becoming independent is an opportunity. There are many areas of life at the moment, for example, on energy prices. That's a big factor in people's weekly outgoings. And we don't actually really have much control over much of energy policy at the moment. That's still controlled from Westminster. What we have proposed is that if this is what the SNP is proposed, but I think it's something that might be taken parties as well. In an independent Scotland, we would seek to take back to the general taxation system some of the warm home environmental obligations that are currently being charged to individual consumers in their electricity and gas bills. And we would seek to take that element back to general taxation, so the burden is spread across everybody paying taxes as opposed to individual households the way it is at the moment. And that would save, I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but that would make a saving per annum. And it would be not just a one-off gimmick thing, it would be a change to the way that your electricity bill is calculated, so it would be a long-term change. And I think that would be a positive thing. And there are many other areas of life where, again, we don't have the control. So on taxation, for example, of oil and so on, excise duties, we don't control that. That's controlled in Westminster. We have in the SNP always proposed a fuel duty regulator that would seek to regulate prices in good times and bad times, so that there wouldn't be such spikes in the price paid at the pump. And again, that's something we can only do if we take control of that policy area. So there's lots of opportunities for us to do lots of different things that will impact in a positive way in people's lives. But in order to do that, you actually need to have the power, to have the tools at your disposal. And that's the bit that we don't have yet. And if we have that bit, I believe we can make a big, big difference to people's lives, because we would be seeking to promote the interests of the people of Scotland, not seeking to act, I think, frequently from Westminster against the interests, or at least not putting our interests anywhere near the top of the table. So I hope that is one example of what we could do with independence.
A lot of the time when we get better together talking about higher cost of living, they'll reference Norway and Denmark and how it's £700 for a round of beer and stuff like that. Well, I shouldn't be saying that, I'm 17. They've calculated that, I was reading on Wings Over Scotland, that actually in Denmark, your average person with your wage, they're actually, while they're paying more tax, they're actually earning an extra £174 a month to live with. So just because there's a higher cost of living doesn't mean that wages stay the same. And I think a lot of people don't really realise that, and that's the one thing that Better Together really trying to force. Apparently everything's going to go sky high, but your wages are plummeting. So it's not true, and I reckon people should go and research it. And also the Wings Over Scotland page, you should definitely have a look at it, because it explains a lot better than I just did.
Gentleman in front.
Just bring part question. Is it 2016 ban independent? If you wouldn't ban. Yeah. What's the projected price of oil in 2016?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What's the projected price for oil in 2016?
Nobody knows that.
What would happen? What would happen in externalisation if you haven't got central bank back in there? What would happen in the first 48 hours when you get independence?
Okay, so the price of oil in 2016, I don't know. What I would say is that the forecasts seem to vary considerably depending on the forecast you're reading. So the OPR forecast always seems to be at the very bottom end, debt seems to be higher. And what I think is very interesting in the last few days, I think that we've seen a report which suggests that in terms of new fields coming through, the forecast in terms of the future value of our oil and gas reserves is underplayed by about a factor of 6 in terms of this report that came out, I think, in the last few days. So I think it's very interesting. I mean, it's always interesting to me when I hear the debate about oil and gas, which is a bonus for Scotland. It's not the basis of our economy, it's a bonus. But that somehow, where any other country in the world would regard having oil and gas reserves as this, fairly useful thing to have, somehow for Scotland uniquely, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's a curse to have oil and gas. I've just never got that. On the issue of the pound, there's been a lot of debate about the pound. I believe that people act ultimately in their self-interest. Okay, so the proposal that the best choice for Scotland is to have a sterling zone with the rest of the UK emanated from what was called the Fiscal Working Group, which was an independent group of economists commissioned by the government to look at options, and that's what they did. And they said, they concluded very clearly that the best option for Scotland, the best option for the rest of the UK was to have a sterling zone, to have a currency union. There would be no transaction costs, so that would be a good thing for both the rest of the UK and for Scotland. The oil and gas reserves would contribute to the balance of payments, so that would be a good thing for the pound, because if that didn't happen, the pound might find itself in the position the gentleman was alluding to. Is that, of course, at the moment, with the great stewardship of Westminster over the finances of the UK PLC, we have about something like a £1.5 trillion debt, or just about reaching that point. Mr. Swinney doesn't have any debt. I think that might be instructive to look at, but we have a 1.5 trillion debt. So if we don't have any claim to what's ours, I mean, the currency, the pound's ours as much as anybody else's, the Bank of England's ours as much as anybody else's. We've contributed to it over decades and centuries. So if none of this is ours, if we are not entitled to any assets, then presumably we're not required to meet any liabilities. So we would be... George Osborne and Nick Miliband, and what's the other one, Clegg, if you still do, saying to the electorate in the rest of the UK in 2015 general election, oh well, we're just going to let these Scots off with a repayment of £5 billion a year. I don't think so. I think really we have to exercise common sense and judgment. It's in the interest of Scotland, it's in the interest of the rest of the UK to have a currency union. I believe, sir, that what will happen when I really believe now that Scotland is going to vote yes on we'll find out the 19th of September, that weekend it will be sorted because the money markets will insist on it, the City of London will insist on it, and pragmatism and common sense will rule the day. But that's my view, and I don't know. Yes.
I'm not an expert on the oil industry, but it would be a very rash expert or economist who would predict with certainty what the price of oil is going to be in a few years' time, because there are all sorts of unpredictable factors. Sorry, it would be a very rash person indeed who would predict with any degree of exactitude what the price of oil is going to be in a few years' time, because there are all sorts of unpredictable factors, including the, God forbid, the possibility of war or whatever. But some of our opponents claim that an independent Scotland would be far too dependent upon the oil industry and far too dependent upon oil revenues. That is not the case, because even at present we have a fairly varied industrial and economic base. We've got, apart from the oil and gas, we've got renewables, renewable energy, and a huge potential to further develop these renewables both onshore and offshore. There are also things like financial services, construction, tourism, our universities, life science, agriculture, fisheries, food, drink, and we could use the oil in the good years to set up an oil fund and part of our oil fund to diversify further and develop the Scottish economy. That is how I would like to see Scotland, in a similar way to how Norway has operated with great success. On the currency thing, there's been a lot of attention on Alex Salmond failing to see what his plan B would be. Well, all I would say is this, that I never thought I would live to see the day when a Tory Chancellor of the Exchequer would climb into bed with a Labour you, Chancellor. Scotland and say you're not going to share a pound in a courtesy union. Apart from anything else, you'd be cutting up their nose to spite their face, because that would be against the economic interests of the rest of the UK as well as Scotland. On point about negotiating, I've never heard of a trade union negotiator or a political negotiator in my life who went into the negotiations before the negotiations even started and said, this is my plan A, but by the way, if I don't get plan A, then this is my plan B. I mean, that is utterly naive.
We haven't answered the question. Why have we not answered the question?
The price of oil is $80 in 2016, ballpark by anyway international. That's secondly, on sterlinisation, if you didn't get a central bank backing yet, your currency would completely collapse and your interest rate would go through. That's true. On the first 24 hours, you're going independence.
I don't think we can dispute the price of oil or like the answer.
24 hours, you're going independent. You have a bank run, or you bank. You've never central bank backing up and not even asked over again.
And Annabelle already, they understand. So the question's been answered. Okay.
My questions to Annabelle. I'm undecided as yet, but my biggest doubt or fear in the event of a yes vote is actually our entry into the EU. Now, from what I know about the EU, I don't think there are going to be no opt-outs able to be negotiated in the future for any country entering Europe. I don't know why there's all the talk about the pound, because I don't think we're going to have any choice in that either, because it's quite clear that it's in the hands of Brussels, and when they decide that we have met the criteria, we will have to join the euro. And anybody who wants to research it will find it easily, and they can look up the Europa website. So that's my main fear, if you like, is that we will be dominated by Europe. And our banks won't have much of a say either. I think we can all think back to Cyprus and what happened to the poor people who had the money in the banks then, when it was decided by the central bank, the European bank, that they would just take out some of their money when we had the financial crisis, when Cyprus went under. So how can we really claim to have independence when we, in actual fact, will be dominated by Brussels? That's my chief fear.
Well, I hopefully can try to deal with a few of the points you raised there. Firstly, on the issue of the euro, to go back to the report I was referring to a moment ago, the Fiscal Commission Working Group, eminent economists, although I guess if you put a number of economists into a room, the old jokes would apply. But two of the economists were Nobel laureates, and one of the Nobel laureates actually was the kind of mentor of the current governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, as I just mentioned that in passing. But on the issue of the euro, they didn't think the euro was the best option for Scotland, and we won't be in the euro. And the reason I'll say this as a matter of EU law is that to join euro, you have to go through certain stages, one of which is voluntary. So one of the stages that's voluntary that you have to go through in order to join the euro as a matter of EU law per the EU treaties is to be in the exchange rate mechanism for 2 years. But that is voluntary. You cannot be forced to join the ERM. So that is where, for example, Sweden has kind of gone sideways because it's not joined the euro. It's got no intention of joining the euro. Nobody's forcing it to join the euro. It's just one of these many peculiarities in the EU that the EU lives with, because it's a very pragmatic organisation. It's a highly political organisation. It's very pragmatic, and it finds ways to get around things. And that is the position of Sweden. So we can't be forced to join the euro, and that is the position as a matter of EU law as it currently stands. I don't know if you've got a supplementary. I think you were trying to come up.
I think, well, it's my belief that Sweden already had an opt-out, it had an opt-out. This is for future countries, and who's to say how laws are going to change in Europe?
Well, I mean, again, I guess, you know, none of us can look into the crystal ball, but what I can say is that Sweden joined in '95, and we're now 2014, and it is no closer to joining the euro. It doesn't have an extended opt-out. It just that isn't being required to do it because it doesn't want to do it. And it's not being required to do it because there's a voluntary element in the process, and that's where the law is at the moment. And Scotland, negotiating her position from a matter within, we are within the EU. On the 19th of September, in the event of a yes vote, we will be within the EU. It will be the UK government, it will be the member state government, and there will be negotiations and discussions leading to 2016, when we would become an independent country and an independent member state. And I have to say that it would be better, Scotland's in the EU, it would be much better if we were an independent member state and had a seat at the top table, because then we could argue for our interests. For example, in the recent agricultural negotiations, Scotland was not at the top table, and we have got the lowest deal. There's two elements of funding in the CAP budget. We have got the lowest of all member states in both funding streams. I mean, how can you do worse than that? You can't be worse than bottom. So if Scotland were there at the top table in her own right, we would get a much better deal from Europe, and I think that would be the way forward for Scotland as an heavily exporting country with lots of allies in Europe. I think we would do very, very well indeed.
I read that the Federal Reserve bailed out the banks. So why does Alistair Darling say we couldn't have done this if we were independent?
Could you repeat the question?
I read that the Federal Reserve bailed out the banks. So why does Alistair Darling say we couldn't have done this if we were independent? And I really think that Dr. Wilson maybe could answer that for us.
Okay.
The question of the banking collapse is really quite complicated, but there are a great number of bits of misinformation put about by the unionist campaign about it. The claim by Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling that they saved the world's economy is absolute nonsense. The RBS actually got a lot more support in America in dollars for their operations in America than the British government did to support them in this country. And the Americans actually paid them $84 billion, or bailed them out to the extent of $84 billion before the British government decided to bail them out. The Americans are very much dominate the economy of the world with the dollar. The dollar is the ultimate currency, and it's in their interest to make sure that there is stability in the world banking system. And so that's what they were doing. They were also protecting their own citizens' deposits, as the British government protected its own citizens' deposits. And if Scotland had been independent, we would have had the money to protect our own citizens' deposits. That's the way it works.
The Royal Bank of Scotland and the Bank of Scotland were, as the names imply, virtually Scottish owned banks with their customers and businesses are trading within Scotland, that latterly developed and became multinational institutions. And what normally happens in the banking sector is when there is a big problem with regard to a multinational bank, then there is a multinational bailout rather than leaving it all to one relatively small nation. So Alistair Darling, who by the way helped to create the banking crisis by giving nonsense when he says that independent Scotland would, in such circumstances, and heaven forbid that such circumstances would ever be repeated, because as I said earlier, if we had an independent Scotland controlled over the banks and financial institutions, then we would be able to regulate them far more effectively and therefore avoid a repetition of the mistakes which were made by the likes of Alistair Darling.
Gentleman in the middle. Could you speak up, please?
As a tremendous par excellence with Dennis Canavan and a wide-ranging topic, such as seem to be, as you seeking my honour, I said, I after you. I said, well, you wait till hell freezes over. Now, I approached Cathy Piquet and Michael Fronte, and they told me I would not reconstitute, there would be no responsibility. I'm having a dialogue at the moment with the president of MSP. I have approached every Falkirk councillor to be told I am not reconstituted. I have approached Carrick Joyce, who tells me the matters of disquiet me and not of his remit.
Can we have your question, please?
The question is, for the people elected to the Scottish Parliament, will be any responsibility? Or was it a matter of disquiet me is not of their remit? And can I ask, who in the Scottish Government gave power to the police, such as they have control over matters of disquiet me?
Annabelle, a member of the Scottish Parliament.
I'm very sorry, so I didn't quite get the whole background to the point you're making. In general terms...
I don't need a microphone. The point I'm making is that elected members tell me I am not the constituent. They tell me the matter of disquiet me is not their responsibility. So why do they stand for election? Are they responsible to me?
Right, I've got a better idea of that element of your concern. I'm not sure what the underlying question is, but that perhaps in general terms, certainly, the way that the Scottish Parliament works is that each constituent has an option. They've got the local member of the Scottish Parliament, who's elected by the first past the post system, and then they've got 7 regional members. And you're entitled to go to whichever you wish, and certainly the MSP that you write to is really required in terms of courtesy, if nothing else, to respond to you and to try to do their best to help you. Now, I don't have a magic wand when I'm dealing with constituents in Mid Scotland and Fife, but I certainly do try my best to do what I can do for them, and that's really what should happen. As for Mr. Joyce, I don't know. I was with Mr. Joyce in the House of Commons for 4 years. I was brought up, nothing nice to say, but somebody don't say it. So I don't know, sir, what the actual reason is why you're not getting a response, but you do have, in effect, 8 MSPs, and I don't know if you've had the opportunity to maybe try somebody you're not feeling that you're getting anywhere with.
Can I have another question?
Steve.
I would like to ask a question on the jobs in Scotland. If Scotland becomes independent, the reason I'm asking this is that Alex Hammond made a statement some time ago he said he would encourage immigrants to come into Scotland to boost the population. Now, I am not a racist by any manner of means, but I am a realist. People have been coming into the country and taking over jobs at a lesser rate. So what I want to make sure is that when Scotland gets to independence, that the jobs in Scotland are secure for the people of Scotland.
Well, I think what Alex Salmon was referring to was the demographic situation in Scotland, particularly when you look at pensioners and the proportion of people in our population who are dependent upon pensions and other benefits. And that is too high for the simple reason that you need working population of a certain number in order to sustain, let's call them the non-working population, whether they're retired people or whether they're people who are sick or young people still at school and university and so on. So you need to always be aware of that and to try and plan accordingly. It's very difficult for any government to start dictating to any family what size the family should be. But I think if you look at the nation in general, you can see that there's a ticking time bomb unless there is some increase in the younger population. And that is why Alex Salmon said that we should have a more welcoming attitude towards young people who want to come to Scotland. We're thinking particularly about young skilled people who want to come here and work and take jobs which sometimes the population of Scotland for some reason or other are either untrained to do or are unwilling to do. So we've got to look at ways and means of trying to encourage more and more of our young people to stay in Scotland instead of emigrating to other countries, and also at the same time bring people in who are willing to live and to work here. And I think if we plan it accordingly, then there should be job opportunities for everyone, rather than just saying it's immigrant workers who are always displacing native Scottish workers. And we have a duty, obviously, too, under the European Union treaties, that we cannot stop them coming, and the UK has to face up to this too, and you've got people like UKIP saying, let's leave the European Union because we want to stop immigration. Well, I think, frankly, that is completely unrealistic, because a lot of Scots people travel to other European Union countries in order to work. And ever since we joined the European Union in 1973, we have enjoyed that right of freedom of travel and freedom to work in other countries. So I think that we have to have a more welcoming approach than what is adopted at present at Westminster. They have a similar problem. I mean, it's not as if the UK as a whole doesn't have that same demographic ticking time bomb, but in Scotland it is a bit more serious than what it is south of the border, and that's why I think, frankly, we should have our own immigration policy. Whether you agree with me or not, I hope you would agree with me on this, that the immigration policy of the people of Scotland should be determined by the people of Scotland through their elected.
Scotland's diversity is what makes our country so great. I'd say that when